Welcome to Jewish Cinémathèque, where we meet some of the important faces involved with films that tackle aspects of the Jewish experience. Today we meet film producer and director Max Lewkowicz, who together with Valerie Thomas created the documentary Fiddler, A Miracle of Miracles. In his film that is screening theatrically and in festivals all across the world, he provides us with a delightful look into the legacy of Fiddler on the Roof, its impact, and how it continues to be staged every day of the year somewhere across the planet. Max.
Great introduction.
Welcome to Jewish Cinémathèque. It's great to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Tell me, how did this idea evolve? You've made other documentaries.
Sure.
You made a film about 3 generations of the Morgenthau family. You made a film about a private first-class officer for television. How did Fiddler, Miracle of Miracles come into being?
You know, that is probably the number one question if we put it on a list of how did you start this or why did you start this? I'll tell you the honest truth. The one thing that I found about documentary filmmaking is first you have to have a story, an interesting story and all that you're interested in about, but then you need the storytellers. And I met Sheldon Harnick when the opening of the show of 2016.
That starred, Danny Burstein?
Yes, and they've had a short preview at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, Living Memorial to the Holocaust. And I saw Sheldon and I said to him, Sheldon, these are amazing stories. Can I interview you? We don't know where it's going to go, but can I interview you? And he said, of course. I'm 90. I want these stories to be told. So we started, and then it just opened up, it blossomed like a beautiful rose, because there were so many layers. There were so many layers. It was not a Broadway show, or simply a Broadway show, which is good enough, but it's about life, and it's about human beings, and it's about the world we live in now and the world that Shalom Aleichem had the prescience to see in 1905. And we developed it, and there's a whole structure that we developed.
So you had this interview with Sheldon.
Few interviews, many.
And then you said to yourself, this is more. This is, Sheldon's stories, but it resonates. And so Fiddler in itself, which is the centerpiece of the film, why it came into being. But it came into being, in 1963, 2 years after West Side Story, which had originally had a Jewish story. It was going to be East Side Story. And now all of a sudden, 2 years later, these guys are playing with the idea of doing a play that's, as you show in the film, considered to be too Jewish. So how did that happen?
Well, I don't think there's anything that's too Jewish, as there isn't anything that's too Japanese or too... I mean, why would you watch Kurosawa's films and say, hey, that's too Japanese, I'm not interested in Seven Samurai. What does that have to do with me? Or, Satyajit Ray in India, of a small village in India. There's stories about life and human beings and how they deal with the struggles. And what's amazing is, what's brilliant about the story is that it deals with so many different levels of the human existence and the human perception of how we deal with each other. So you have, and it's happening again today, so you have refugees and you have people being kicked out of their homes, and you have family struggles of acceptance, and how we deal with traditions and how they break. So all these layers sort of opened themselves up and said, this is a story about life, happens to be Jewish. I'm Jewish. I connect to it a lot. I'm a son of a Holocaust survivor. And yet the show has only one point, and I'm going to ask you to guess, where it relates to the Holocaust, where I found or I discovered it related to the Holocaust. But it wasn't about the Holocaust, but it was about everything else. And we love Tevye.
And but I think that's what makes your film so special, because you pull out and you talk about how in each era that this play was reprised, put forward again and again and again on Broadway and around the world. And I sat there and I watched these kids in Thailand putting on Fiddler on the Roof, which was so powerful. It spoke to different people, different generations. It dealt with different subjects. And yet it is a story about a Jewish guy with tzitzis, who looks different than your ordinary person on the street, and yet you come to love this guy.
He's a great character. Tevye is...
On the other hand,
Tevye is a remarkable human being who has to deal with all these issues. His beliefs and the struggles of his community and supporting his family, protecting his family where everything is falling apart. In extreme poverty, he loves his wife, and yet they have this struggle between each other. They bang heads with each other, which is sort of a wonderful, do you love me? I mean, they didn't even understand what that meant. What do you mean, do you love me? So he's an amazing character, and he loves his children, and he loves his community, and he loves his faith, and he's challenged all the time. He's really pushed to the limit, and we, as viewers, watch him and say, that's a special guy. He's a hero.
no. There is no other hand.
In all our literature and our movies and all that, we're looking for those heroes, the ones that stand out and make them feel like they're part of your family and you're glad they're on your side. So
Is it because we just don't have enough heroes in today's world?
that's a good question. I'm an optimist. I'm really an optimist, and I believe that there are heroes that come out. I also believe that, like everything else, we're always challenged by people who are greedy and people who are cruel and people who are crazy. And this challenge is a human condition, a human existence. We always are challenged. If we look at the history of human beings, somebody comes along and says, no, you can't do this or you can't do that. So to answer your question, I don't know. I'm hoping we have enough heroes, but I certainly know that at least there's a stalemate between the bad guys and the good guys.
And he is clearly a hero. You know, I watched your film, and I'm sitting there, and this was really quite powerful. You took a couple of clips along with an interview with Topol, and you put, Golda and Tevye together, and I never really paid attention to their relationship, the love, and you bring this out, and then you take it to the next generation, and again, I don't want to give away the film because this is a film that must be seen, but the whole issue of these three daughters,
Huddle! Oh, Huddle! Have I made a match for you?
taking it upon themselves. This was a film this was a play that came out in 1963, right in the middle of 64, right in the middle of the civil rights movement, feminism, and you have three women who proclaim that they're going to speak out. They're not going to be quiet.
My mother was a strong woman, and I have great respect for women, and I think that women, in many ways, are the answer to the problems of the planet. Just let them take over. And we'll see the changes that take place. I think we as men have screwed things up enough. So let women, so these three young women say, no, I want this, this, and this.
But they're breaking tradition.
They're breaking tradition, but traditions are always broken. Traditions are always broken, and traditions move on and all that. And as long as we maintain the traditions to remind us of who we are and our identity, if we keep our identity strong and understand why we wear the tzitzis or why we light candles on Shabbat, then we've maintained this tradition. I love the Passover Seder. We have amazing Passover Seder. We invite everybody, much to my wife's chagrin. But I love the explaining of the matzah and the haror and reading the Haggadah and then adding in, civil rights songs, which haven't been done before. That's tradition. That's tradition. And if you can maintain that tradition, you have something of a structure, something of a background that keeps you alive and keeps you going time after time as you're being challenged.
Let's take a moment now and look at a brief clip from the film Fiddler, A Miracle of Miracles.
We had regular meetings, and Robbins would say, what is this show about? And we would say, well, it's about this dairyman and his 5 marriageable daughters. He'd say, no, that is not what gives these stories their power.
Ultimately, we said, oh, for God's sakes, Jerry, it's about tradition, isn't it? And Jerry said, write that. That unlocked everything that the show needed. It was like an education to people like me about what that society was like, what a shtetl was like.
And who does Mama teach to mend and tend and fix, preparing me to marry whoever Papa picks?
He had demanded they write the opening number tradition. And then for the first 8 weeks of directing the show in New York in a rehearsal hall, he wouldn't stage it. And everybody was saying, Jerry, you have to stage the opening. He just wouldn't. And then one day he staged it in half an hour.
Max, in the film, you dig into the production. Mounting a production, like mounting a film, requires, a whole variety of steps. What's powerful is you start out with hearing from the producer, the great Hal Prince, who just passed away in August of 2019, and his idea. So here you have a guy who's a mainstay on Broadway, Jewish born, Jewish parents, and yet really not Jewishly connected. And he takes it to the next step, and he brings in Jerome Robbins. And one of the things you do so well is you have different people speaking about Robbins and Prince and your writer and Bach and Harnick, and then the book by Joe Stein. I mean, it's incredible.
In order to understand the show, since I clearly did not understand it when the guys offered it to me, Sheldon gave me a book on shtetls. So I signed on to do the show. The budget was $250,000 for a musical, which today you can't do a one-man show off Broadway. The guys asked me to direct it originally, and I said, I'm the wrong guy. And we talked, and I think maybe I said Jerry Robbins should do it. And my thinking was very clear. I thought it had to have universality, and his incredible adroitness at movement.
Jerry Robbins was a very controversial figure, and suddenly they bring in this guy to take the lead of Tevye. His name was Zero Mostel.
All day long I'd biddy-biddy-bob if I were a wealthy man.
Jerry Robbins said that Tevye must be larger than life. And that's why I want to go with Zero Mostel.
Zero was very much an egoist. He felt the need to be on stage, off stage.
A lot of Zero's behavior would have made people want to kill him, but when Zero did it, they would laugh.
The first day of rehearsal, we were all worried because there had been bad history between Robbins and Zero.
I won't use the word hate, but Zero did not like him for his revealing names to the House Un-American Activities Committee.
That was a big conflict. I mean, the issue there was with the fact that Jerome Robbins had been pressured by HUAC, House Un-American Activities, during the
Committee of Congress.
The committee. And they were blackmailing him because he was gay. And they said, tell us names, give us names. Robbins was a tough person to deal with, but a genius. And a brilliant choreographer, a brilliant genius.
He had done West Side Story.
West Side Story. And,
among many other things.
Yes, and he was a magician, and everybody wanted to work with him, and everybody didn't want to work with him. That was the problem. You know, people that tend to be like that tend to be tough to deal with.
It would only live in his memory or the memory of other people. This affected him greatly also.
I think it's fair to say that he became very much the top of the creative mountain of the show that became Fiddler on the Roof. Something about Mr. Rabinowitz from Jersey City, who had become Jerome Robbins of New York City Ballet and Broadway. Something about his roots was gnawing at Robbins. And I think he tapped into something about the story and the notion of Eastern Europe and the pogroms, that he was singular in his vision about the kind of musical that he wanted to have created. And he bludgeoned it.
And Mostel was blacklisted.
During that period.
During that period. He couldn't get work.
Right.
And so there was an animosity between the two of them from the first day they met each other on the rehearsal stage. And the tension was severe. Now, I tend to think that maybe that tension added to the tension of the story. That maybe the animosity between Robbins and Mostel added a certain spice to the feelings that were going on, the rawness of the elements that were happening on that stage. And Robbins was tough to the cast and was tough to everybody. He was tough to Austin Pendleton. He just beat the crap out of him.
Who played the part of Motto.
Yeah.
And who was in the film, and you interview him along with the woman who played Saito in that original production.
Exactly, Joanna Merlin. So it was a tough struggle, but Jerome Robbins is one of the great treasures of American musical history, of the American theater and American music and American ballet, and he showed it the way he staged the story. So you have there the mechanics of creating this wonderful masterpiece, and then you have, well, what are these stories about? You know, where they're constantly asking, what are the stories about tradition and tradition breaking?
And here you have, you know, a guy in Jerome Robbins, née Rabinowitz, who was not all that connected Jewishly.
Not at all. He was, as many Jews. I believe, you know, that a lot of Jews in America after World War II tended to stray away from their identity, their tradition, because you'd rather not be Moscovich, you'd rather be Moss. You'd rather, you know, be Robbins rather than Rabinovich. And we all experienced that. We wanted to be like Leave It to Beaver. We wanted to be like the Cleavers. Right. We wanted to be that family. We didn't want to be, you know, lighting candles. You know, it's only later that we begin to realize how much of a treasure that is, to be able to do that. And people suddenly get brought into that and say, this is who I am.
So is that what happened with Fiddler, you think?
Yes, what happened was Jerome Robbins, he went on a tour in 1958 to Eastern Europe.
Take it easy.
Ballet tour, American Ballet Theater, and he said, I really want to find out about my parents' family, as many people do. So he went to the small town Rozhanka, which was decimated by the Holocaust. It was just wiped out. And when he saw how it was wiped out, and he had grown up as a 5-year-old, he went for visits there. He said, oh my God, this is what it's all about. We've lost something here. There's a story that when the show opened up the first night in September of 1964, Robbins was standing in the back and he looked, and there he saw his father weeping. And this father said, how did you know?
Wow.
He said, how did you know? So I think he understood how important it was, to make this happen and make this right, and this is his connection.
Do you feel the same way?
Yes, of
Max,
course.
you, product, Montreal Jewish family, child of survivors, Yiddish speaking?
Yes, yes, I do. I'm not a religious person in that I do go to synagogue every now and then for the high holidays, but I'm not a religious person. But I'm fiercely proud of being Jewish. I'm fiercely proud of the accomplishments of the Jewish people. I push that to my kids as well. I don't force them to do anything they don't want to do. But we are who we are. And I'm sure if you ask an African American who comes, who has a history, that comes from slavery, or if you ask a person from India, or if you ask anybody they're proud of who they are. You have to have some sort of structure within you. You have to have that identity.
It's really terrific. I mean, your first film about the Morgenthau boys. I mean, you think about the fact that he stood up to Roosevelt, the eldest, and so there's a Jewish story here. But this is Max sort of finding his way through his creative form. Let's take a break here and look at another clip from Fiddler, A Miracle of Miracles.
Sheldon and I, we'd become somewhat familiar with the book. We'd separate, and I would guess as to what kind of music in terms of ambience, period, character, and so forth. So I would send Sheldon a half a dozen melodic guesses.
I always looked forward to these tapes that Jerry would send. On each tape, one or two of them would coincide with ideas that I had for lyrics.
Shell, here's a ersatz Hasidic swinger. It's fun, and it's a little musical comedy, but it might be a kind of tour de force without being cheap, but just being bubbly and spirited and kind of kooky. See if you like this one.
So Max, you made mention of a piece that relates somehow to the Shoah, to the Holocaust. Can you tell us what that was?
It's really interesting because when I've seen the show so many times and all that, I said, the show was done in 1964. It's amazing that this big dark shadow of the Holocaust isn't over the story, but it is. But there's one line where, at the end, where the family's leaving Anatevka and they're packing up, and Chava and Fiedka, who is the Russian boy who she marries against her father's wishes, intermarriage, and they walk to the family as they're packing the card, and they say, "We're going to Krakow, where people treat you very well." And I asked Joseph Stein's widow, I asked, did he put that in on purpose? Because when I heard it, and my mother was from Krakow, it's 40 kilometers from Birkenau, from Auschwitz. when I heard that, it just gave me the shivers. And I'm sure a lot of people don't realize that. But I realized that this is 1905. They're 20 years old. 35 years later, they're doomed. They're doomed. So when they say we're going to Cracker, they might as well say we're going to our death, but we'll be okay. That struck me forever. And the one thing I would have liked to have asked Joe Stein when he was alive was, did you mean to write it? And I'm positive he meant to write it.
Fascinating. The original Shalom Aleichem has them going off to Eretz Yisrael.
Of course.
And now all of a sudden they're going to America.
Of course.
One of the things that you do in the film is with this great interview with Topol, who of course was the star of the film. You ask him, what about the way you played Tevye? How was that different?
Well, it was actually a choice of Norman Jewison, who was a brilliant director all the time. The interesting thing is Jewison was a remarkable social activist at the time in the late 60s, early 70s. He made all these amazing films that dealt with social activism. And he didn't want the shtick of Zero Mostel. He didn't want the shtick. He wanted something that was a lot more real. So when you're making a movie on the hallowed ground or on the bloodied ground where the Holocaust happens, he shot it actually in Yugoslavia. He wanted someone who was more real and not a comic or a character that was just an entertaining person. I never saw Zero do it because I was too young. Supposedly his first year he was an amazing Tevye. But he chose Topol because Topol was a tough Israeli guy. He was in the Israeli army. He was saying, "Get off my land."
This is still my home. Get off my land.
And it was post-1967 when the movie is made as compared to the original Six-Day War. And as you show in the film, Jews felt a little differently.
It was a different feeling and all that. Interestingly enough, I just want to say that the now Fiddler on the Roof in Yiddish is remarkable. And Stephen Sky Bell,
who's in your film, you recorded him singing in Yiddish. That's off Broadway.
And his performance as Tevye is amazing. He's a Jewish boy from Lubbock, Texas, who didn't speak a word of Yiddish, but he's a remarkable actor, and he really brings out Tevye. He may be, I would say he's certainly one of the best, if not the best.
The greats, Theodore Bickel, Herschel Bernardi, Michael Bernardi. Max, delightful to have you here with us.
My
Much
pleasure.
Continued success. Fiddler lives in Yiddish and in Fiddler, A Miracle of Miracles. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, P.O. Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.